Hi, so this is just a little video introduction to the task that I mentioned at the end of the last class, because it's something that's a bit easier to describe it verbally than in a written form. So the task is to do something like what we read in the Patrick Gale examples that I shared on the resource, in which he presents the character of Rachel Kelly through the lens of some of her artwork. And we were looking at that kind of thing because we were looking at this technique called ekphrasis, which is writing about visual representation or something that's some kind of visual artwork. And the reason that I think this is a good exercise to sort of flex some creative muscles is because it is a really good way of exploring that idea of presenting something through an oblique angle, particularly presenting a self-narrative through an oblique angle. And what I mean by that is, rather than saying the things that we're used to narrating about ourselves, like usually, we say what I do, this is my job, this is my living situation, this is my family, this is my age, those kind of very literal ways of describing one's life. This exercise is, how do I represent myself in a perhaps more expressive way, in a way that, like in the Patrick Gale, rather than saying or trying to describe in a literal way the kind of grief that Rachel Kelly feels after her son dies, he presents this painting that she's made, and it somehow tells us more about the way that she experiences this event in her life, and more about her particular character and her particular narrative than if he'd said, she was grieving. Perhaps because through these kind of imaginative ways of representing quite complex things about ourselves, even though it seems more abstract, we can strangely be more precise. So anyway, it's just a way of exploring that as an exercise. So the idea will be, the task will literally be that you will plan an image that would represent something about your narrative that you want to share, and then describe that image. So a self-portrait, and then describe what that self-portrait looks like. And through those little hints, we'll get ideas about the kind of character that's coming through, or the kind of feelings you're expressing. I'll give you an example. If we look at this David Jones portrait, we notice that the artist is making certain choices, and those choices help to represent something, to give a sense of this person. When they come all together, we get a sense of the character of this person. But it sort of leads us into interpreting that ourselves. It's sort of suggestions rather than a showing rather than a telling, you could say. So, for example, when we look at this, what choices do we see that the artist has made? Well, maybe the first thing we notice is that the figure in the painting is very hard to distinguish from the background. It's quite difficult at first, when you first glance at it, to see where the figure is and where the background is. And so there's a sense of this person representing themselves as perhaps blending in, not a boldly stated figure, someone it takes a bit of time to sort of tease out from their surroundings. We might also notice, in contrast, what is prominent. Well, I think one of the first things we notice is the prominence of this ear. It's a lighter shade than anything else. And similar with the hands, they sort of stand out, whereas everything else seems to sort of blur into the background. These things stand out. Well, why would, it's just thinking through, why would someone make that choice in their representation of themselves? Perhaps there's a suggestion that this person is a listener. Also, the hands here, well, it makes us think about this person. Perhaps, it's because he's a maker that there's a prominence of his hands. And also, they're in this sort of very delicate gesture. Definitely doesn't give a sense of, strength and boldness and that kind of thing. It gives a much more sense of something delicate, something gentle, something perhaps, effeminate about this character. And there's lots more we can read into this. It helps then, perhaps, if you're trying to tease out these kind of choices that the artist has made, to look at some of the others and compare them. Well, when we compare, for example, these two, in this one, there is just one figure represented. So an isolated figure, and it kind of in the center and taking up most of the canvas. Whereas in this one, there are several. Now the self-portrait is this figure here. This is Frida Kahlo. Now she takes up a very small portion of the entire canvas. So what is this suggesting to us about her character? What kind of thing is she trying to represent here? Perhaps that in these figures seem to overshadow her own personality, perhaps. There's a sense in which they hold a sort of bolder presence in her identity than she does herself. Also, she's represented herself as a child, so perhaps it would make us think of a kind of vulnerability, um, and other things that might be associated with that. You kind of gradually tease these things out about the character, but even so, having said that she's small in stature in this, she takes up a small part of it. She still is in the center, essentially here, and is holding the thing that ties her family together. And there is perhaps even in her posture a sense of boldness, despite the fact that she's slightly less significant place in the painting. And again, we can just have a think of, well, how does that compare to the choices that these other people have made? Well, similarly here, we have Velasquez, the painter here, not in a prominent position in this painting. And there's a sense that this is a working artist in his context. And what he does is paint for the likes of these, like Princess Margarita, this character here, and the king and the queen who are just seen through the window here, through the mirror, sorry. And so it's this sort of bustling context that describes him as a character. Whereas, for example, take Susan Wilson. Again, we just have the one person. It's also represented in her working context, but in this isolated way, you get a sense of someone who is sort of completely absorbed in the work that she is doing as an artist. You can see that by the sort of concentration on her face. And even though there's this very strange gesture, there's a real sense of idiosyncrasy of this person not presenting to anyone, but being very much completely absorbed in the thing that she's making. So the aim of this task then is to sort of look through these and use them as inspiration to think about what kind of choices you could make to represent yourself in visual form. Is it going to be brightly coloured, and what kind of thing would that suggest to the person looking at this painting, or whatever? Or is it going to be not a painting at all? Is it going to be a collage? And that will give a sense of things that maybe don't naturally come together, but in your life they have, or there's a sense of layers or whatever it might be. But thinking about making these visual choices to represent something about your own narrative, I'd say just have a bit of fun with it and explore and have a don't fret too much if you're if this is something very unfamiliar to you. Just have a go at it. Once you've jotted some ideas down about the kind of choices that these artists have made, the kind of visual representation of yourself in your own self-portrait, then have a go at writing a description of it. And one way that people have done this task that seems to work is imagine yourself coming across this portrait, this self-portrait, and then describe it to your reader. So represented in a slightly fictional narrative in which you come across this portrait. Good luck, and I look forward to hearing some of these if you give this a go.